I'm Shauna Rosner, your host of In-House Counsel Chronicles, a podcast designed to chronicle the career journeys of in-house counsel so we can collectively learn from their unique paths to their in-house position, the challenges they've overcome, the milestones they've celebrated, and how they're shaping the future of law in today's rapidly changing business environment. Today, my guest is Valissa Turner Howard. Valissa earned her BA from UC Irvine in 2004 and her JD from Case Western Reserve University School of Law in 2007. She also achieved an MA in Psychology Diversity Management from Cleveland State University in 2012. She serves as the Chief People Officer and General Counsel of the Greater Cleveland Food Bank. Welcome to the podcast, Valissa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about having this conversation today.
Me too. So I want to start by asking you what originally drew you to law?
Sure. So I was drawn to the legal profession because my mom was a JAG in the Navy. So I grew up watching her go to work, and sometimes I would go with her work with her and see like these big law libraries and these books, and was really like, I'm going to be a lawyer like my mom. At the same time, I'm watching legal, television shows. So I watched them with my mom. So we were watching like Perry Mason and, Jessica Fletcher and Murder She Wrote, that's what it's called, and all those sorts of things. So, in my mind, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a litigator. And I'm going to be a criminal litigator because this is what I was seeing. So that's kind of what pushed me to go that way.
Okay. And then at what point did you realize that traditional litigation wasn't the path you wanted to continue on?
So when I got to law school, pretty much the first semester, I was like, oh, no, this isn't what I thought it was. This isn't what I want to do. I realized that I didn't want to be a traditional lawyer. I realized that I liked the skill set that I was acquiring. So how to think, how to write, how to communicate complex ideas. But I wasn't drawn to the traditional practice of law itself. And that realization didn't push me away. I didn't say, well, I'm going to quit law school. I said, I'm going to finish and I'm going to take what I learned here and figure out, what is for me. Draw my own map, chart my own course, whatever you want to call it. That's what I decided to do with the education and the opportunities that I would gain through going to law school.
So aside from that, like kind of aha moment while you were in law school, were there any other defining moments or decisions that shifted your career trajectory?
Sure. So when I sort of made an intentional decision to follow a non-traditional path when I was in law school, right? First semester, not going to do it. Also, I did kind of an environmental scan when I was in law school, trying to figure out, okay, if I'm not going to do this, what am I going to do? What can I use these skills for? And I started reaching out to people that I found were doing jobs that I thought I might want to do. Cold calling, I would email and request an informational interview just to learn about how they built their careers. How did they get to where they were? And honestly, most of the time they were like, oh, I fell into it. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't planned. I just fell into it. And so I said, well, that's one way to do it, but I don't think that's the way I'm going to do it. I want to be more strategic and I want to create my own roadmap. And so I started looking again at the skill sets or the jobs that people had before they got to where they were going, like clerking for a federal judge, did that. Working at a law firm, did that. Doing these different things where it looked like they had gathered skill sets that they needed to get to where they were going. And so I started plotting that map myself. And so it was law school, and then it was having these conversations with people who were in positions or roles that I thought, that's something that I would like to do.
And then you ended up at the Inspector General's office after law school, right? And worked there 7 years to start?
I I worked a couple other places before I got to the Inspector General's office, but yes, I did work there for 7 years.
Tell us about first where you went before you went there.
Sure. So when I graduated from law school, I received some really good sage advice that I give other people who they come out and they're like, yeah, I don't want to be a lawyer. And I say, okay, but you did go to law school.
Mm.
So you should take the bar and you should work as a traditional attorney for 2 to 3 years just to make sure that this is really what you don't want to do. And for me to get some ROI on the money and the time you spent going to law school, right? So I took the bar in California. I'm originally from Southern California. I took the bar. I worked at a firm for a little bit. I clerked for a federal judge. I worked at a law school in a role as a senior administrator. I worked at a law firm as an administrator, not as a lawyer. These were all in diversity, equity, and inclusion roles. And then I worked at a small plaintiff side law firm doing employment law there, and finally ended at the Inspector General's office, which you didn't necessarily need to be a practicing attorney for the job, but you did need to have had a law license and had practiced before. So this was like the perfect kind of reason, like the example of why you take the bar, you practice a little bit, and then you move on. They want to know that you could, that you did, even if you're not doing it now. So that's when I got to the Inspector General's office where I was for 7 years. And I started as an assistant inspector general. And by the end, I was the first assistant deputy, kind of like the chief of staff, second in command. Yeah.
Okay. And what did that experience, rising to second in command,
Yeah.
teach you about leadership?
So at the Inspector General's office, we did investigations, compliance work, navigating complex, often politically sensitive situations with elected officials, county workers, county board members, who we were trying to make sure that they were ethical, that they were making good decisions. And it became into existence after the county scandal with county at the time commissioners is what they were called. We changed the whole type of government that the county had and then created the Inspector General's office. So that experience really shaped my leadership. It taught me how to make decisions in gray areas, how to balance competing priorities, how to lead with integrity, even when decisions aren't easy or popular, because we were very unpopular as an office who was constantly investigating complaints or ethics violations across the county, no matter what your position, whether you were the county executive, which that was my first investigation when I got there, was to investigate something that happened with the county executive, or you were a janitor in one of the county buildings. If there was an investigation to be had, we had to do it, and we had to do it with integrity. And so it really expanded how I thought about impact as well. Working at that level in county government, it's sort of a systems level, and working at a law firm or as an individual contributor in different areas, those were individual issues. So I had to start thinking about patterns, systems, organizational behavior, etc. The big takeaway, though, is that leadership is about making principled, integral decisions, even when they're uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Very sage advice. And then you took kind of those leadership skills and other skills,
Mhm.
I imagine, that you had gained at the Inspector General's office, and you went
Mhm.
into the nonprofit space, correct?
Yes.
And
Yes.
what drew you to move into the nonprofit space?
So it really was the position that was available. It's what I call my unicorn job. So my current position as Chief People Officer and General Counsel encompasses quite a bit. So I am the senior leader for human resources, volunteer experience, which is similar. We put that under the umbrella of talent, our paid and unpaid talent, legal compliance, and also what used to be our DEI work. We're no longer sort of focused externally. We're now focused on other pieces. So legal compliance, human resources, and volunteer experience were kind of the main pieces. And so it took parts of different things that I've done. I've been a lawyer. I've done compliance work at the county in the Inspector General's office. When I was a lawyer, I was an employment attorney. I've done plaintiff and defense side. And so that influences the human resources work here at the food bank. And then volunteer engagement. My husband will tell you that I'm a professional volunteer. And so I've been a board chair, I've been the president of a board, I've been, a volunteer in many different organizations for most of my life. And that stems from my mother, who has always said, service is the payment we have for being on this earth. And so I started as a Girl Scout in service. But it just had pieces of all the things that I was good at or that I had experience in. But it was in one job. And then it was at a job at an organization that was in service of a mission that I really, really was kind of deeply cared about. So that alignment made the decision really clear for me in terms of moving from the government space to a nonprofit space with an amazing mission.
Yeah, and I'm going to get into your board service in a little bit. But before I do, I want to spend a little bit more time talking about your current role at the Cleveland Greater Food Bank. You were the first in house counsel there, correct?
Yes.
What does that responsibility look like day to day?
So working at the food bank is a pretty fast-paced organization. There's always something going on, and it's not just distributing food. We're also looking at the root causes of hunger and poverty and other social ills. But the general counsel piece for me really looks like reviewing contracts, managing outside counsel, advising the executive team, helping the organization to think through risk, but not just legal risk, also strategic risk and decision making more broadly. And so because there was no general counsel before, I kind of had to build the legal function from the ground up. We had to create a way to house our contracts. We have a library, electronic library now. We're working on getting electronic signature. So just kind of putting structure in place to make sure that we had appropriate legal infrastructure was when I first got here. But just day to day, it's, kind of general things that you think a general counsel would do, but it's also mixed with all the other things that I do in this role. And since I'm the only lawyer, I've got to really be very organized and figure out efficiencies and ways to do things so that we don't get behind on contracts. We don't get behind on strategic decisions that need to be made where legal input might be helpful.
What made the Greater Cleveland Food Bank decide to hire a general counsel when they did?
My understanding was that the organization was growing exponentially, very fast in terms of number of people and just the type of work that they were doing. It was no longer straight food distribution. There were other more complex issues or things going on that really could stand to use an in-house lawyer's eye. We were depending on outside counsel, outside pro bono counsel to assist with a lot of different things. We were building a building, renovating another building, doing all sorts of things that really required more hands-on internal assistance. And also, if they could find a lawyer that had the HR, employment law side as well, they were getting more bang for their buck. And so that's my understanding of why they went ahead and hired someone who could be a general counsel along with someone who had an employment or HR background.
Okay, that makes sense. And then your role is especially unique because you're both general counsel and chief people officer.
Mhm.
How do those responsibilities intersect? I imagine they do, but maybe they
Yeah.
don't.
I mean, they actually fit together very nicely. Many of the biggest risks of an organization with a lot of staff are people related, right? Culture, leadership, decision making, equity, what all these different things that have to do with people and their work. So having oversight of both legal and people functions allows me to connect those dots, ensuring that policies are not only compliant but actually lived out in the culture of the organization. So it creates a more holistic approach to leadership and risk management around employees, employee relations, all that sort of thing. And so we have true HR director, generalists, et cetera. But I've kind of have a strategic level bird's eye view to connect the dots between HR and legal and really being more preventative and making sure that I'm protecting the food bank before we get to litigation, before we get to, someone making a complaint. Let's do that on the front end and not be reactive.
Okay. And then tell me then what skill set or skills have
Mhm.
been most critical in managing such a broad role?
Sure. So I'll say two things: judgment and communication. So, constantly making decisions in a complex organization requires strong judgment. That's critical. And it's just as important to be able to communicate clearly, whether that's with the CEO, with other senior leaders, with our staff, if I'm making a report to the board, that sort of thing. So at this level, it's not just about knowing the law or knowing where there may be risk. It's also about helping others understand what it means and how to act on it. And so I think judgment or discernment and communication are some very critical skills in this role.
I could see that for sure. I
Hmm.
want to go back to your involvement in the community. You're
Sure,
involved professionally and personally.
sure.
And as you mentioned, you've been involved in R on some boards. Tell us a little bit about that. What made you decide to get involved? I think you shared a little bit, but tell us a
Yeah.
little bit more.
It all goes back to how I was raised in terms of being of service to others. To whom much is given, much is required. And so always sort of looking back and pulling people up with me has always been a part of my career, even when I was in law school, and I was in leadership positions in student organizations, and or I had a mentor or excuse me, a mentee through Big Brother, Big Sister, have always been doing that kind of work. And so I continue to do that now. I currently serve as the board chair of the Village of Healing. I serve on the board of the Lakeland Community College Foundation, and I am on, well, now it's called the Black Philanthropy Center of the Cleveland Foundation, formerly the African American Philanthropy Committee. So I've just sort of been, in different spaces in the community. And as I've gotten older, I've began to really curate or cultivate the spaces where I'm going to give my energy, my volunteerism, because I have less time now that I have a family and a very demanding job. And so I've been really kind of trying to figure out where can I make the most impact? Where what organizations are making the most impact in the community. And so by my association, I'm helping to make that impact. I have really been looking for those sorts of opportunities. And I think the Cleveland Foundation is one of those organizations that is literally putting their money where their mouth is in terms of community and building a better community in Cleveland. So I've really enjoyed that organization and being a part of that committee, as well as the Village of Healing, which is focused on they started on Black maternal and fetal health at really, really bad numbers in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County around that. They've now expanded to the Black family as a whole, so they are serving men as well, but they have a lot of innovative services, and their numbers in terms of the number of women who are delivering healthy babies and who themselves are healthy when they deliver are amazing. They're knocking it out of the box. And so, again, looking at impact and what these organizations are doing in the community is how I've kind of decided where I should expend my energy.
Well, first off, I'm grateful that I live in the same community as you and that we have you here with your motivation and dedication to these different boards. Thank you for your service, and I know you'll continue to do it. I'm curious if any of that board service has influenced the way you think as a lawyer and an executive.
Absolutely. So in the past, when I was on boards, I either worked for the government or I worked for a private law firm or something like that. I hadn't worked as an employee for a nonprofit. Now, having been an employee at a nonprofit and in fact focused on risk and employees, et cetera, I have a more elevated view of how smaller nonprofits should probably be running so that they can avoid some pitfalls that I've seen or that I can see coming. And so that's been really helpful on these boards that I've been on, where I can give some insight that's based on firsthand knowledge of what's going on in the nonprofit world or I'm getting to take trainings and I can also, say, hey, I know this is coming up or this law is changing. You might want to look at this. So definitely working in a nonprofit in an executive role has influenced how I now can be of service on these boards.
That's great. I've learned so much, and you're the first person I've had on that's in a nonprofit role. So I
Um,
really appreciate your perspective. I
Sure.
want to ask you a couple of pieces of advice. One is if you were to look back, what piece of advice would you give yourself as an attorney just having taken the bar exam?
Um, if you have just taken the bar, if you don't already have a job lined up and you can, take a break. Take a break now because because this is it. You're going to start working and it's going to be hard to find the time to take a break. If you can, like, even if you just take a week before you start working, do it.
And then what advice do you have for someone kind of similar to yourself who went to law school, realized that during law school or after that they really want to work for a nonprofit? But what advice do you have for them? How to go after that and how they can have an impact?
I would say think about when you say you want to work for a nonprofit, what does that mean? Do you want to be in development? Do you want to be an executive in a nonprofit? Do you want to be running programs? Do you want to be more like a case manager? Because along with the level you want to be at comes how much money you're going to make, how much flexibility you'll have. Are you really interested in just the mission, or what is it that is drawing you to the nonprofit? Because, I've worked here with people who also had law degrees and they were not in a legal capacity or compliance capacity, but they wanted their legal degree to be acknowledged. And so you have to think about where you're working and what type of work they do, what's their mission, and then what you're doing. Sometimes your legal degree is not necessary and therefore it will not be acknowledged.
Right.
And so if you want to be somewhere where they acknowledge that you have a legal degree, you need to think about the job you're taking. Think about the work you'll be doing. Is it compliance related? Is it quasi legal? Or are you a case manager who really could have had a social work degree, but you decided to get a legal degree? You have to kind of be strategic and think about where you're going, why you're going there, and what your role will be, because you're likely not going to change the employer. You have to decide for yourself is if you're willing to accept the role, the pay, the benefits of where you're going and what you're accepting.
Thank you for that advice. It's really good advice. And I appreciate your transparency. Really important, I think, for people to hear that. I want to thank you for the time you gave to me and our listeners today. It's really been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thanks, Valisa.
Absolutely. This has been great. I appreciate the opportunity to share.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.